It gives us pleasure to invite Dr. Lalnunkimi to present the book review today. Accredited journalist Dr. Colney, research on media conflict and nationalism, a study on the role of media in shaping Mizo nationalism, makes her an ideal person to do the review on a book written by Puzaram Thala, from guerrilla fighter to chief minister. So I kindly invite Dr. Colney to share us the insight. Good evening, all of you.
In the year 1975, a young man stood inside the Pakistan embassy in Rome. He was explaining why he needed a visa extension. With the tone of someone who had been born and brought up in Islamabad, he spoke with fluent Urdu, talking about how he had lost both his parents, how his only surviving aunt was in Singapore, and how his maternal uncle from London, was coming to get him so they could travel to Singapore together. His visa extension was granted. That man is the author of the book that is being released today, who is seated with us. He was not born in Islamabad, but he was born in the eastern corner of Mizoram in Samthang. And his history, the story of his life, is intertwined with the history of Mizoram. In its 430 pages, from guerrilla fighter to chief minister, takes us on a journey from the dusky streets of Dhaka to the polished avenues of Rome. It carries us through grueling jungle treks and half-planned escapes from Pakistan to Afghanistan. The 10 chapters takes us on a journey across years and continents, from the birth of the author to the birth of the movement for independence, and from there to each and every jungle hideout, each city and each country where the leaders of the nationalist movement traversed in the hope for a brighter Mizoram. When I picked up the book, I thought skimming through a few pages and maybe reading a few chapters would be enough to present the preview, and it might have been enough. But once I started reading the first page, I could not stop till I reached the last page, and I think that will be the case with everyone who holds this book. It starts with the author's early years and then goes on to talk about the rise of the Mizo National Front, from a detailed profile of Pulal Denga to the formation of the Mizo Cultural Society and the MNF. It talks about the admirable courage of simple men from the hills, I believe some who are present here today, who went and met with foreign dignitaries seeking arms and ammunition support for something that they believed in. It chronicles Operation Jericho in Mizoram, and beyond that, it chronicles Operation Chin Hills. It talks about the years spent in East Pakistan's Chittagong Hill Tracts and Arakan. And as the peace process begins, it takes us on international missions to Islamabad, Bangkok, Geneva, Rome, Germany, and then brings us back to India and talks about the detailed accounts of the steps towards signing of the peace accord. This might be history that you have heard of before, because we are all part of that history. But with the accuracy and the details that are found in this book, I assure you, is something that you will not find anywhere else in the world, because this is from the point of view of a young researcher who did her research on the Ramboy years. I scored through the library of the State Library here in Mizoram. I've even gone to the National Library in Kolkata looking for historical data about these Ramboy years. And the facts and data presented in this book is something that is not present anywhere else in the world. In this book, it is fascinating how a young boy who was homesick just from having to go to school in his neighboring village of Kobung South would later on go to the border of Pakistan, trying to cross over to India at night. I think Puton Luya was his partner at that time. Yes, they spent the whole night walking without a compass, without a guide, in danger for their lives, not knowing whether they were going east, west, north, or south. From a young boy who was homesick just to go to school in his neighboring village, and then trying to cross the border of Pakistan to India while his life was in danger. That kind of courage can only come out of an immense love for the homeland and for the country. It is also commendable how in this book it is given that at the young age of 25, he was the secretary of Pulaldenga. In this book, he talks about people who were similar to his age at that time. That was the time of the hippie revolution. And the people he met in Karachi, in different countries, they were all intent on enjoying life. They were all intent on exploring the world. But though the places he visited, whether it was Bangkok or Rome, they still remain the top tourist destinations today. And though he walked through those streets, he did not walk through those streets as someone who was hungry for adventure. He did not walk through those streets as someone who was exploring the world, but as someone who knew that the weight of his people's world rested on his shoulders. The details are immaculate. We may have heard of the independence movement time and again, but some details provided here, such as Pizaite, I think some of us may have not heard of her. After reading this book, I've come to believe that she is single-handedly responsible for the peace that we have in this state today, because without her financial and logistical support, our leaders would have not made it to the Indian embassy in Kabul, where the peace process began. So she played a very important role, and her role is given in detail in this book. There are just two things that I want to highlight, because the rest of the book, I hope that the readers will explore on their own. Whenever we speak on Ramboy, or the movement for independence, especially for the younger generation or for those who are not from India, what comes to mind is a group of angry young men on a quest for vengeance. But this book makes it clearer than ever that it did not start with a quest for vengeance. It started with Pulaldenga forming the Mizo Cultural Society with a simple intent to promote the culture of Mizoram, because the people of Mizoram were neglected and marginalized. And then it went on to repeated peace negotiations, which were ignored, and later on, which led to the movement for independence. A second point that I wish to highlight is the grouping of villages. This is something that I wanted to talk about because it was part of my thesis, and it is the darkest chapter of our history, but we do not talk about it enough. I'll just give a little bit about my research here. So in my research, we did a comparative analysis of how the forced grouping of villages was covered in local vernaculars here in Mizoram, and compared it to how it was covered in leading national newspapers, including the Statesman, the Times of India, and the Telegraph. 99% of the reports in the vernacular newspapers talk about suffering, hardship, famine, and death. 99% of the reports in the leading Indian newspapers at that time talk about how the forced grouping was a blessing for the people. I'll just read out one line here. The report reads, "Away from our familiar turmoil, a novel experiment is being conducted in the Mizo Hills district to resettle a group of unsophisticated, tradition-bound people in a way of life more prosperous than they had ever known." So that's how they chronicled it, in a way of life more prosperous than they had ever known. But as the author writes in this book, the forced grouping of villages permanently and completely destroyed the village-based Mizo economy, and the rural economy is impacted till today. This book is also a book of miracles, and it details how one miracle after another led the author to sit with us today, how his life was spared multiple times, and how God's hand was the part of the history of Mizoram and the making of this state. The author mentions this in every chapter. He does not attribute only the good things to God, but also the things that seem like it was a failure, but they later realized that it was God's plan all along. For example, he reflects on Operation Jericho and talks about how if the MNF had taken over the treasury in Aizawl, it could have probably led to their downfall due to corrupting influences. So examples like that talk about how God led them every step of the way. What has always astonished the people of Mizoram is the author or the ex-chief minister's fluency in English and his affinity with complex English words. And I found the secret to his knowledge in this book. When he was in Islamabad for 4 years, starting from the year 1973, he visited the Pakistan Council Library, the British Council Library, the United States Information Service Library, and studied English language every day to gain the proficiency that he has today. He even composed songs and wrote a novel at that time. On a lighter note, the author mentions James Bond at least 3 times in this book, which leads me to believe that he is a fan of James Bond, and I would like to tell him that if this book was ever made into a movie, it would need someone like James Bond to take on the role of the author. I want to end this preview by talking about the book from 2 perspectives. First and foremost, as a Mizo. As I turned the pages of this book, what stood out to me was our struggle with identity. How that struggle began at the very making of India, when Mizoram was included in India without consultation, without choice, and without referendum, and how from that pain emerged 2 decades of resistance. Reading this, it not just helps us learn the history, but it helps us see where our struggle with identity comes from and why it still echoes in our lives today. This book also points out that crime was decreased during the nationalist movement because people were united for a cause. But today, if we reflect on our society, we are divided by politics, by small disputes with our neighbors. Would this, and one cannot help but ask, would these divisions matter as much if we held on to that strong sense of shared identity and belonging? Somewhere along the way, we seem to have lost that unity. And perhaps that is why this book matters now more than ever. We are at risk of losing touch with who we are as a people, and we are increasingly disconnected from our history. We are disconnected from the struggles that shape us and the values that define our society. So a book like this becomes a guide. It shows us where to look when we seek to reconnect with our roots and try to understand what it truly means to be Mizo. Secondly, from the point of view of a researcher, the topic of my thesis, as the anchor had announced, was media conflict and nationalism, and examining how media played a role in shaping of Mizo nationalism. So to collect data for this thesis, I had to go through a lot of books that were authored by non-Mizos. Books such as Nirmal Nivedon's The Dagger Brigade, books such as from Sajal Nag, a historian. He has written a lot about Mizoram's history. And while reading these books and also appreciating the efforts of these scholars and people from outside the state and from other countries who worked hard on chronicling what had taken place in Mizoram, I found myself often longing for accounts, often thirsting for accounts written by those who are actually part of the history. And accounts of written by someone, by a voice who have actually lived it. And today I think I can say I hold that voice in my hands. So this book is not just a memoir, it is a historical document. It is going to be a treasure trove for researchers. I will admit that I have to go back on my research and make some corrections after reading this because I've learned more truths after reading this. So on behalf of researchers, scholars, and future generations, I want to thank the author, especially for having a diary for over 50 years, I think, which really helped him give the meticulous detail that he has given in this book. And lastly, I'm going to make an appeal. If you are interested in politics, read this book because it will tell you about the politics of Mizoram, like every detail, like you've never read anywhere before. If you are not interested in politics, read this book because it reads like a Sidney Sheldon novel, so you will be swayed away with it. And if you are a Mizo, read this book. It will help you understand how your identity was shaped. If you are not a Mizo, read this book and try to understand how the people of Mizoram were led to this day. So, because this is the story of not just one man, it is the story of Mizoram. His life is not separate from our history. It is woven into it. And he sits among us today. Someday, he may not be here anymore. And when that day comes, he will always be remembered in in history, and what will always remain is his story. His role in shaping Mizoram will be preserved in these pages for generations to come. So this book, I believe, after reading it, is not just something you should read. It is something you should pass down to your children and grandchildren so that they learn about our history better. Because this book is not just his story. It's not just the author's story. It is our memory, our collective memory. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lalnunkimi, for introducing and preparing for Guerrilla Fighter to Chief Minister.